My name is Thomasina Ruth, and today I will be sharing my story of trauma and abuse that I went through throughout my childhood and adult life, and the types of abuse that I endured through my adult and child life. I grew up in an elegant lifestyle. I've always lived the fancy lifestyle, had lived in nice homes, but looking at my life, it wasn't what everybody thought it was or what it may have seemed to be. Growing up, I was lonely, of course. I felt lonely. Though I had my mom and my stepfather and my two siblings, which was my older brother and sister in the house. That's how we grew up. My brother, he wasn't actually my biological sibling, but we were raised up in the same household as a family, so I called him my brother. My mom was very strict. We had chores. When we come home from school, we had to do our chores. We couldn't turn on TVs unless our chores were done a specific way. I often got red flags from my stepfather because he was very controlling to my mother. He would want a lot of things to go a certain way. I believe that the reason why my mom would make me call him dad is because he would force her to have that type of authority over him. And it was a lot of controlling because my stepfather had money. The fact that him having money played a major part of my mom's lifestyle and the way she chose to also run the household and make him feel that he was in control of everything. I was 4 years old when the abuse started, and it was verbally. At that moment, I was not aware that he was grooming me. He would verbally, when I say verbally, he would always tell me how quiet I always seemed. And I remember one time he grabbed me and he held my arms to my chest, telling me that if I was to ever be placed in this position, this is what you do. It started at the age of 4, verbally. And as I got older, it became physical. And when I mean by physical, abusing me, touching me in my private area and things like that. He will also, I remember a few times in a few homes where this abuse had partaken, though I was young. I remember the homes. I remember how my mom decorated the homes. I remember the places where he would take me when he would physically abuse me. And majority of the times when he would do these things to me, my mother would leave me home with him while she would go to choir rehearsal because we were brought up in the church. So when she would go to choir rehearsal, she would leave me with him and take my older two siblings with her. And I would cry and tell her that I did not want to stay because when she leave, I knew what he was bound to do. I knew what he was going to do. My escape was trying to go to, I had a favorite aunt, and that aunt was the only escape or the only place where my mom ever really let me go. But even with my aunt knew she knew, and she would tell my mom, you shouldn't leave her around him. She didn't think it was safe and things like that. Though my aunt knew something was going on, she just could not pinpoint it. My aunt had her kids that were my cousins, and when I would go over there, the times that I would go over there, I would always feel much safer over there because I knew I was away from my stepfather. It lasted till I was about 10 and a half, 11 years old. And it lasted around that age because sooner or later, my mom finally divorced him. So the type of abuse, not only was he verbally and physically abusing me, he verbally and abused her son as well. But when my brother made it aware to my mom, she ignored it. That's why when it started happening to me, I didn't have the courage to tell or share with anyone because when my older brother was telling her it was being ignored. So I figured, well, if My brother's telling her what he's doing, and she's acting as if it doesn't matter. What makes me think that if I tell her it's happening to me, that it will matter to her? Domestic violence relationship with a guy who became my children's father, who I now have 3 children with. And that toxic environment lasted 8 years. I met my children's father in 2011. When I left, I never went back. When I left, I didn't have nowhere to go. We were currently living in another city at the time. And when I left, I came back to my hometown city. I was homeless and staying in a park for a few days. A good friend that I had known for years, and she opened her door to me. I told her what was going on, and I didn't have anywhere to stay. So at that moment, I was in a very dark moment in place in my life. I'm still trying to figure things out and find my way. Living with her, this is how I met my children's father. Like I said, my children's father was related to my friend's husband. That's how we met. 2020 is when I had my 3rd son. 2 weeks after my son was born, I walked away and I never looked back. It has been 4 years since I've been out of that toxic relationship. Even though I have kids with him, it took a lot for me to walk away. We have 1 daughter and 2 sons together. My daughter is the oldest. Having a daughter is what made me walk away from that relationship, because I did not want this generational curse to be passed down to my children or my daughter. I did not want her to think that it was okay for any man, whether it's your dad, your uncle, your cousin, anyone, to disrespect you in any type of way, or thinking that it's okay for someone to treat you a certain way, for you to know your worth and to know who you are as a person. My life changed for the better. I began to gain self-esteem back. I began to dig deep within who I comfortably am. I began to find myself again. I began to gain my voice back. I began to start putting myself first, my happiness first, and doing more of what makes me happy, regardless of what anybody has said to me, have done to me. I must say that a lot of change has taken place, positive change, great change. I lost my biological mom when I was about 3 years old. I remember growing up, I never really was allowed to be around my biological father. My mom would never let me be around him like that. It was not with her or my stepfather. I remember a few times when my biological father would try to come around and build and have that relationship with me. The first time I think I ever remember seeing my father was I got off the school bus. And when I got off the school bus, there was my stepfather, my mom, and my biological dad standing at the front door of our home. When I got to be an adult and I gained the strength to try to have a relationship with my biological father, my mom was very angry. My biological dad does have a history of violence. I remember picking up the phone, calling him, telling him that my mom had passed, and his response was, "I'm sorry to hear that. Maybe we can go on with our life now." At that moment, that's not the response that I was looking for. That's not the response that I wanted. That's not the response that I should have gotten from him. So I decided to shut that chapter in my life. I figured that I never had a dad. I never had a father, because the man who I had to call my dad abused me. He didn't treat me like his daughter. He didn't love me like I was his daughter. Then once I met my biological dad and tried to build a relationship with him, we didn't have that relationship either. So I just got tired of trying to be the daughter of fixing broken relationships that I had no control over. So 2021 was actually the last year that I spoken with my biological father. I'm very proud of myself for decisions and the change that I have made. I knew that my mom had a mental disorder. You know, she passed away broken. She never healed from childhood trauma. I just want to say that it was after I shared my solitary story, I felt free. I felt the burden off me, and that was a generational curse that stopped with me as well as my children.